This is a quote by Governor Pickens of Alabama in April of 1825, and he's speaking to Lafayette. For the singular honor and gratification your kind visit has conferred on us, you will be pleased to accept our thanks, and I pray you that during your stay among us, you consider yourself as we wish you to be, entirely at home. Cahaba is located at the confluence of the Cahaba River and the Alabama River, and we're just downriver from Selma.
Can you tell us what Cahaba is about? What is the significance of this park here?
Well, it has something for everybody, but most people think of it as Alabama's first state capital. It was literally carved out of the wilderness to be our capital. The governor designed an entire town plan for Alabama to grow into.
And when was that?
That was 1819.
So of course the interest that we have in Cahaba is that Lafayette came.
Yes, and like the biggest event that they had was when Lafayette came to visit. They thought of Lafayette as their benefactor for the nation, that he was probably the biggest superstar they would ever see in their lives.
So to me, I think one of the key elements of Southern identity is hospitality. I feel like there's a great example here in Cahaba with regard to that famous Southern hospitality. Can you elaborate on that?
This was very much a frontier situation. They had just built this town, started to build it out of nothing, in 1819, and here's 1825, Lafayette shows up. So a lot of people were living in log cabins, there were some brick buildings, there was a state house. You know, he'd been to fabulous places, big cities, and they felt a little insecure that they were on the frontier in the wilds of Alabama. So they wanted to be as hospitable as they could. When you add up everything, they spent about $20,000 on him, but they only spent $10,000 on their first state house.
And what does it say about how they viewed him? That they would spend twice as much just on the private reception?
Exactly, than on their first state house. Right. You know, they painted it, they repaired things, so they got new glass for the windows. So they really wanted to make it the best that it could be. They imported cigars and wine and Madeira and brandies and all this sort of thing, and they made triumphal arches out of flowers, had a ball, had a dinner. So it was just this vacant piece of land with an Indian mound and a moat around it, and they had built the state arsenal there. All those people that couldn't afford a ticket to go to the big fancy dinner, they were having their own barbecue, because in the South, you know, we don't do anything unless we have barbecue. That's just what it's all about. So they came to the fancy dinner and they invited him to come to the public barbecue, and he did, and they had a table set out for him, and he enjoyed some fellowship with the common people. All the people collected, they looked down at him, and every eye strained to see him, and they said every heart was overflowed with love and gratitude for their benefactor.
What is the significance of his visit to Alabama in 1825?
When he was making his grand tour, this is the first state he entered that wasn't one of the original 13. They saw him as a symbol of the American Revolution. He was the hero of the revolution for them. There were very few men remaining that were in the revolution. And so he was also kind of a symbol of all those men, that many of these people, it was their fathers or their grandfathers. He was something bigger than a human being. He represented all that was important to them about their country and their nation.
Which were what, in your view? What do you think he represented?
Well, they hated the Brits. Part of it.
Lafayette's political discourse gives tremendous importance to the right to self-determination. He also supported the rights of Native Americans inside the United States. Do you see any connection at all in Cahaba and with regard to Lafayette's visit to Cahaba on April 5th, 1825, as it pertains to the Native-American connection?
You don't have any stories about Native Americans being here on his visit. And in fact, you have them hiding. This whole centerpiece of the town plan was built on this relic landscape left behind by Native Americans that lived here, that had a town as big as Cahaba was at that time. And Cahaba today is a ghost town, but when Governor Bibb came here before 1819 and selected it to be our capital, there was already a ghost town here. There was one of the largest Indian villages on the Alabama River drainage. It's labeled Ancient Indian Works on the early maps of the area. So they were Native-Alabamians. Their descendants are probably the Creek or the Choctaw. So what was left was this relic landscape, and Governor Bibb put that as a centerpiece of his town plan. He was going to set the state capitol building atop the Indian Mound to show dominance over the land. He had built a temporary state house and adjacent, and that centerpiece was called the Capitol Reserve because he thought he was going to be able to build his permanent state house there in 1825. We know on the early maps they have it labeled Ancient Indian Work. Everybody knew what the earthworks were. But the day that Lafayette was there, instead of telling him that story, they're telling him that, oh no, these are French fortifications.
So they romanticize a story to please him as the guest?
Yeah, they were trying to please him as a guest, and you know, maybe they didn't know him very well. He might have enjoyed the story about the culture that was here before, based on his history. So maybe they did the wrong thing.
Lafayette is an abolitionist, so what do you make of that abolitionist anti-slavery legacy that he brings with him?
That's something I think most Americans don't know about, but they should, especially where we're sitting here now. We're in the shadow of Selma, Alabama. You know, and the county seat was here before it was moved to Selma. This is the first place newly emancipated people came to the courthouse just a block from where Lafayette marched up in 1825. First place they were allowed to go register to vote. And they created a freedmen's village here for a little while. So that's in 1865-66. And 100 years later, in Selma, in 1965, that's when the voting rights marches that started going to the courthouse there. But realizing that history about Lafayette, I think is real important because most people don't know about it.
The troops and deputies stand stolidly by as the prayers are said and the marchers go back to Selma. This Alabama town will go down in the history books as a turning point in the civil rights drive. From the halls of Congress to the smallest crossroads hamlet, people can understand the plea that no American can have freedom and justice unless there is freedom and justice for all. In Selma, there is a lesson to be learned.
I'm so proud of Selma, Alabama. I'm grateful that I have an opportunity to live in a place where those that came before me saw something, saw an injustice, and just didn't see it, but did something about it.
Lafayette was a bridge between centuries, the 18th century, the 19th century, and nations, cultures. And he really developed a political identity as a champion that says all men are created equal, we have equal rights. That message, this message of Lafayette, to me resonates so intimately with Selma. Lafayette believed in a march of civilization toward freedom, and here we had literally a real march for freedom. What do you make of that connection?
One cannot speak in history about the importance of abolition without talking about Lafayette, but also without talking about Selma, Alabama. Lafayette and Selma are intimately connected on this journey of life. Somebody was listening to what Lafayette was doing. They knew some of the actions that he was taking. So I would like to say, perhaps Dr. King and Lafayette never met, but I would like to say that those things that he believed in, those basic human principles, human rights, equality, that those types of large principles are somewhat passed in our DNA. And somehow that trickled down to individuals that were able to pass on those principles to Dr. King, Amelia Boynton Robinson, all of those people that fought here in Selma. There's no better measure of an equal right than the right to vote that took place here in Selma.
You mentioned Dr. King. So, you know this famous quote, "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere." It's obviously widely attributed to Dr. King. Now, I think somebody like Lafayette could have said something like that in his day and age. It's also why, to me, there's an interesting connection between natural rights and a constitutional act. So one of Lafayette's messages was to say that the best way to protect those rights was to enshrine them in a written document that would become, and I'm quoting Lafayette, a catechism.
I think that the civil rights movement makes documents like the Declaration of Independence. It makes documents like the Constitution. It makes them prove that they're not just words, but these are principles to live by. All men are created equal. Anybody can say that. Anybody can write that.
But how do you enforce it? Is the question.
It has to be enforced. It has to be put to action. And so we had these great words, all men are created equal, but you don't have them putting into action. But those people that really believe those words, that believe in the meaning of those words, those are the people that have to take those words and make them not just good things to say, but a reality for individuals. And so I look at the whole idea of what Dr. King stood by, that previous quote that you mentioned, that could sum up the life work of Lafayette. Because although he didn't say it, he lived it. That was his life. He practiced what was preached.
So this river here, the Alabama River, he sailed down a steamboat on April the 5th, 1825, what's called the Henderson. The boat anchored off Selma for a little bit, and people from the town got on the boat to say hi to him, a foreigner so far away, Lafayette. Why did they do that?
I'm a believer that a lot of times when you go to a place and you're true to yourself and you're sincere in your beliefs, a seed is planted. But I believe that his presence here in Selma planted a seed so far back then that it carried all the way to the time of the voting rights march and those things that took place in Selma. His presence here served as a magnet. People wanted to come see this person espousing these views. Even if they could just see him for a brief moment, they wanted to be able to see and to be able to hear from him himself. And so I believe because of what he was doing, because this country, and Lafayette, I feel, has to be some type of kindred spirit. I feel that Lafayette was comfortable here because the people of this country were about the same thing, about freedoms, about advancing one another's lives.
Somebody like Lafayette in his time, he was basically telling his contemporaries, if you believe hard enough in your principles, you can affect change. You can institutionalize those natural rights. So I think the story of the marchers here that went on that very bridge, it shows the same message. It shows that 200 years later, you can still institutionalize those natural rights and complete the story of the American Revolution. What do you make of Lafayette's message back then and how it still applies to our society today?
I believe that the institutions of our government, our founding documents, are a manifestation of Lafayette and his belief. The fight that Lafayette had his entire life seems to me to go about freedom. That seems to be his mantra in life. He's gone, but he's not.
He's still here.
He's still here. Our ancestors used that bridge named after a leader of the Ku Klux Klan to go forward, to bridge the gap between injustice and racism to freedom and advancement of all people. It's absolutely amazing to me that named after that individual is now synonymous with civil rights. He had no way of knowing that years after being on the Alabama River, this same river was the river that my ancestors crossed to fight for rights. That's another symbol.
Despite all the changes that come with modernity, those institutions are resilient. They're able to process political revolutions inside an American story. It's incredible to me. That's something that is unique to this country. It's gorgeous in its way. It's such an incredible thing to have a country like this. You know what I mean?
It's absolutely amazing. I think freedom, the ideas of freedom and equality, I believe those are things that can never be killed.
And to me, you just spoke the political gospel of Lafayette. That's to me what he believed in. So the folks that marched on the bridge in 1965, they institutionalized equality in your view.
This bridge serves as an international, worldwide symbol because it shows when people who are oppressed, people who are underserved, people who are mistreated, that when they come together in a nonviolent manner, but with a genuine purpose to have the law applied equally, they can make change that will impact the world. That bridge takes us into the future. Are we going to have and live in a world and a society where people are not judged by the color of their skin, but the content of their character? In this world, there is going to always be a fight to perfect. That's another tenet of my faith. None of us are perfect. Man is not perfect. Because man is not perfect, there are going to be some. There are going to be other Lafayettes and other Dr. Kings that are going to try to create a more perfect union.
Equal justice under the law, constitutional liberties. Lafayette upheld these very same principles on two continents. During the French Revolution, he wanted to see full civil rights extended to French Protestants, French people of Jewish descent, as well as to free people of color in the colonies. Les mortels sont égaux. Ce n'est pas la naissance, c'est la seule vertu qui fait la différence. In the New World, Lafayette defended the accession of the enslaved to full and unalienable civil rights as Americans. To John Adams in 1786, Lafayette wrote, quote, "In the cause of my black brethren, I feel myself warmly interested." End of quote. It is this consistency of constitutional messaging that made Lafayette the hero of two worlds, and the national figure beloved and appreciated in the United States as a champion of American freedom. Because without democratic equality under the law, there shall be no real American independence from Europe. In Alabama, Lafayette witnessed the genuine hospitality of a grateful people for a veteran of their revolution. Alabamians showed the same superior New World democratic manners that had first mesmerized Lafayette during the Revolutionary War. In return, the Frenchmen praised Alabama's economic prosperity as evidence that the young American Republic was indeed the shining city on the hill. Nevertheless, as he traveled across the South, Lafayette recoiled at the widespread use of slavery, largely because, in his view, the right to self-determination was not limited to nations. It also applied to individuals, including the enslaved. Today, the coherence of Lafayette's messaging of constitutional liberties and unalienable natural rights enjoys a wide appeal across the American South, including here in Alabama, because it tells a uniquely American story of national unity, liberty, equality, and justice for all. As George Washington once said, the United States Constitution is the system of government closest to perfection ever invented by mankind. Lafayette believed in that also, and that is why he always sought to make the U.S. a more perfect union.